The bad weather continues in and around New South Wales. The southern parts of the state have been particularly thumped, although areas like the Central Coast still remain quite the problem. A lot of people still in the middle of things, some people starting to clean up.
So cool. It's so incredible. I think they're a little scary though, but it's so fun. It's so fun to watch.
Yesterday, amazing. It was as big as I've ever seen it. And the surf inside Black Beach, 3 to 5 foot.
We just went to the blowhole.
How was it?
Beautiful.
Did you get blown away?
It was working. It was working.
Sir, compliments on the moustache. Mwah, spectacular. As for the SES, this is part of their efforts today. Now, remember, these people are volunteers. On top of everything else they do this at a moment's notice. They've got to walk away from their jobs, walk away from their families, and sometimes leave their own homes unprepared. So we're forever thankful to anyone in the orange uniform.
7 flood rescue activations took place, with vehicles ending up in flooded waters. There is a lot of debris on the roads. Trees have fallen, power lines are down. The roads are also very slippery. There have been multiple car crashes, and we're asking people to please take care on the roads.
This is the live radar picture. As you can see, the swirl is continuing. It is ever so slightly moving south, but the intensity of which is still, again, either side of Sydney. Parts of Sydney have copped it. Starting to go a little in towards, say, the Blue Mountains in terms of west of Sydney, but the south coast of New South Wales is copping a thump. Beneath this image you can see here is some rain that's making its way towards Victoria, and above the very cold weathers of the past couple of days that are starting to be part of that Arctic blast and are moving their way towards Queensland. So it is not just something specific to this part of Australia if you happen to be in New South Wales. But again, the devastation and the damage, these stories are relentless for obvious reasons. We live in a big and complicated world, no matter what some people want to say, that there's a way to solve wind, rain and all the rest of it. But the damage is still worth seeing that has been around over the past couple of days. As for the very latest, let's find out the latest now from Sky News Weather about what happens tomorrow.
We are now at the tail end of this system. Most of that wet weather should clear out before dawn on Thursday. Now, that offshore low that's really been building all of this up, the most powerful one of the three, that's going to push further out to sea, and that's going to really finally ease the rain, wind and surf conditions we've been seeing.
But you can see the rain around Tassie all the way through to the southern coast of New South Wales. On the other side of the world, it's a different story. They closed the Eiffel Tower today to tourists because it was too damn hot. Temperatures in some parts of Europe, like beautiful Portugal, were in the 40s, 30s in France, high 20s with a chance of pushing much into the 30s in the UK. So if you know people on that side of the world, wish them all the best, because the Eiffel Tower closed to tourists as temperature records being smashed all over the place when it comes to Europe, and not some sort of 18-degree heat wave, but a fair income one that is happening all over the continent and the independent territories that are the United Kingdom. Now, for some time, I have often said that when it comes to the Australian cricket team, more than happy to cheer them on when it comes to what they do on the field, but they can be a little bit woke, can't they? As you will have heard by now, they've come up with a way of not playing cricket on Australia Day. Now, technically, if the T20 competition doesn't finish on the 25th, well, the game could be played on the 25th, but at this stage, no plan for cricket on the 26th. Why? Because they're woke, right? Warren Mundine, talking to Sky News and the Daily Telegraph today, said that he thinks it's bizarre what they're doing. What is their reason they have given for this? It's really pathetic, and the public who follow the team, follow cricket, love the sport and pay their good money to watch it deserve to know, if anything, Cricket Australia should come out and give a reason why they will not play on Australia Day. Now, I mention this not because you haven't heard it 15 times already today, but because it does give me an opportunity to kind of mention something that I have been thinking about for months. I remember sitting there during the summer holidays and just my phone started blowing up with a whole bunch of people yelling at me, bringing back some comments that I had made in the past about Australian cricket. Now we know that its captain, Pat Cummins, is one of this new generation of athletes, and there are more athletes that are woke these days than not, particularly around sports like cricket. But in terms of Cricket Australia, they are absolutely living up to the old term, go woke, go broke. That's the way it goes, right? And a lot of people turn around and say, well, Paul, you've said this in the past. And in fact, the item that meant my phone started exploding in summer was when Australia defeated India. Oh, go woke, go broke. What do you say now, mate? We just won. Again. Well, my point is not about the players on the field necessarily. It is not about their performance on the field. But when I say about Cricket Australia going woke and going broke, I'm talking about Cricket Australia, the very people who are awash with television money, awash with ticket sales, awash with merchandising sales. But if you actually have a look at their financial results over not the past 12 months, but let's say the past 3 years, they all tell the same story. In the last financial year, Australian cricket lost money. Dare I say, go woke, go broke. Cricket Australia announced a net deficit of $31.9 million, that being American dollars. Sorry, Australian dollars 31, American dollars $21 million. Well, what about the year before? Well, that was a $16.9 million loss for Cricket Australia. So 2 years in a row, regardless of whether they win, lose or draw, whether they thump them 5-0 or whether everything gets washed out and it's a draw. 2 years in a row, they have spent more money than they have coming in. What about the year before that? Well, they too lost $5 million last financial year, despite a World Cup and Ashes wins. That's the story of cricket and Cricket Australia. Now, some will say the reason because they are losing money is because they are supporting a whole bunch of competitions that didn't exist 5-10 years ago. They've got multiple versions of T20 teams and big bashes, and that's the reason. But it also could be that, remember, the players turned around and essentially dumped on one of their sponsors. For some people, it's a little through gritted teeth that, yes, out of habit and out of love for our country, we'll cheer them on. But sometimes the oh-so-woke positions like Australia Day, too scary for us, just means you don't enthusiastically support the way that you previously had. Which might be a reason why Cricket Australia has pursued in the past couple of years a rather bizarre strategy, which is to pretend that they are going to move things like tests like Boxing Day from the MCG or the pink test from the SCG. And bizarrely, state governments have ponied up taxpayers' money to guarantee that the events that are only famous because of where and when they are played continue to be played where and when they will be. This is part of the legacy of Mike Baird as the boss of Cricket Australia. Now, we know his record when it comes to some sports, particularly greyhound racing. He tried to run it out of town. And despite his best efforts, things are not getting turned around financially, as we can see 3 years in a row when it comes to Cricket Australia. Perhaps a little less focus on the woke and a little more on the bottom line. But what do I know? I'm just a guy on TV. Now, as you know, I do not look particularly kindly on the endless conversation around Australia Day that becomes things like the Invasion Day protests. I want to be honest about our history, but I think Australia, whatever day we would choose, would be one where the same stuff would happen. The reality is there are the stories of Australia. There is the thousands of years before settlement, and there are the, fingers crossed, thousands of years ahead that are the modern story of Australia. No one who is in any way a decent human being would not be completely aware of the obvious difficulties and at times atrocities that took place during the period after the First Fleet arrived. There'd be no question about it. But I also was open about that maybe some people don't want a body put into the Constitution to help deal with Indigenous issues, one that obviously no government would turn around and ever say no to. So who would end up as the premium authority in Australia? Well, we know how all of that went, and that was a couple of years ago. And yes, often sometimes we talk about it too much. And that vote wasn't a complete, let's never talk about this issue ever again. It was very specifically about that idea at that time being put forward. And yes, I have shown you that many times that things like Welcome to Country become, just a little too much. The idea that we've all been in plenty of scenarios where you're looking around saying, sorry, why are we doing this? It should be a special occasion. In the same way we don't start every single workday with the national anthem, do we need to start every single Zoom meeting or sporting contest with Welcome to Country? Now, again, all of that can be true. But then there are also hard truths that sometimes we need to sit down and listen to. Now, this does not mean that it is a black armband view of history, nor does it mean automatically that those of us that, of course, were never part of such atrocities either need to pay a price, or certainly our kids need to be held back because of the sins of the past. But every now and then, there are moments where, regardless of how you feel about Australia Day, about Welcome to Country, or how you voted in The Voice, that we need to be honest about our past, what we do with that past, how we move on from that past, how we educate ourselves about our past. That is well and truly up for debate. It's one we will have tonight with John and with Stephen, two very big, proud, passionate Australians who may have very different views on how to deal with this. But today was one of those days where you may well have voted no in the Voice referendum. You may well feel, as some do, about Welcome to Country, and you may be somebody who loves getting out the green and gold zinc on Australia Day. But we still have to know about some of those atrocities. And a major report was released today in Victoria. This was their version of a truth-telling commission. And in some of the reporting about this, and these are very big, very thick, very detailed documents. Sometimes it's the first time some of these stories were being told, others more detail was being added. As the Australian newspaper put it today, violent, illegal and stolen. That is the verdict on European settlement in Victoria. Now again, you can agree or disagree, but let's actually listen to this for a second. The final report described the arrival of European settlers in Victoria in 1834 as an occupation. They said it was illegal, rapid and largely uncontrolled. The taking of country and resources was violence, as First People were displaced and massacred by European settlers in the pursuit of their land and waters. Well, again, you can feel all those things about that stuff I was talking about before. You can be pissed off about whether cricket is or isn't being played on Australia Day, but clearly that's the truth. How we deal with that truth has to be the debate. Not the debate about whether we need to ever hear about this truth. Another version of those that have gone through what is a very big and detailed document. Truth-Telling Commission calls for redress, financial compensation for Aboriginal Victorians. I'll get to that in a second. But again, what was in this report that was released today? Because I have a very big feeling that what was released today is going to be the building blocks of the basic forms of information that generations of kids are going to be taught. They note a range of injustices, including the theft of land and waters, oppressive policies, incarceration on missions and reserves, the deconstruction of language and culture, and the forced removal of children from their families and communities. Today, the Victorian Premier, who yesterday and earlier this week was talking about having her own version of The Voice, despite the fact that the people of Victoria had rejected such an idea at the national level, well, knowing that this report was coming, she has said that, yes, that is something that she will be pushing on with in Victoria. But rather than just dismiss all of this as yet another example of the black armband of history, or to wallow in the details of which are supposed to create a sense of guilt in people who did nothing wrong, and those of us who do not need to atone for the sins of the past, but clearly want to accept that there is not just some sort of before and after, and we don't really talk about the transition and the difficulties of those changes. The reality is we've got to find a way to learn about this. Do we need to learn about it in every lesson, in every single classroom, every day? Of course not. Do we need to put it into subjects like mathematics? No. But I've long been a proponent of things like, say, a Mabo Day, where it's not about the different weeks and the sorry days and all the rest of it. It's a single national public holiday, which you may well have on the 25th of January, to recognise the Australia that was here before the beginnings of what has become the modern Australia that we know and deeply love today. I also have been a person who's believed that Australia should do what some other countries have done, which is to have, in the same way you have a national museum, that there should be some sort of an Indigenous national museum in Canberra, so that when you're a school kid, you can go to the Parliament, you can go to the War Memorial, you can go to the National Museum, and yes, you can go to the Indigenous Museum as well. Because as we know, currently, everyone is trying to do this work. You cannot go on any sort of a cultural website in Australia without some sort of deep recognition of the past. When the reality is that if that had a focus in a building, an institution and a day, then maybe, in my view, that is the beginnings of the way to find a new path forward. Because regardless of what has been written in the past in our history, the pages that are yet to be written are blank, are blank, are blank. And regardless of whether you are the kid born into the poorest part of the toughest part of the Northern Territory, or you are the one who is lucky enough to be born in the richest street in a capital city in our country, all of our futures are interlinked. Now, as for what this report is suggesting, again, rather than just glibly bouncing over it, I wanted to actually show you what some of the demands are. Now, you can want all of these, you can want none of these, but we've got to have the chat about it, right? Again, in part, we will have that discussion tonight. Not about black armbanding, not about some sort of bleeding heart lefty version of things, but come on, you can't pretend that today wasn't a very significant day in talking about a past that some of us may claim to know about, but most of us probably don't know enough about. That's just the reality, right? Now, take or leave it, this is what they want. They want to amend the law to make workplaces culturally safe, to establish a complaint handling process and review pay and leave policies for First Nation employees. They want to implement quotas for First Nations representation on company boards and government boards. They want to establish markers and memorials at significant sites to honour First Nations histories, including past injustices, massacres, missions, frontier wars, and leadership as determined by traditional owners or Aboriginal groups. They also want to restore Indigenous place names in Victoria, prioritising key public areas like parks, waterways, roads, and ensuring that they are reflected on maps and documents with names chosen by traditional owners and coordinated by the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. I think, apart from anything else, that is going to happen. Again, I'm not saying it should happen, but I'm saying it's pretty obvious the Victorian government wants something to happen here. The renaming of things, not co-naming, but renaming of things is well and truly there. Again, this report says that it wants to encourage churches in Victoria to return land acquired cheaply or reserved for them to traditional owners and share proceeds of future sales of such land. There's more, and I want you to see this. I want you to know what is on the table. Because remember, all of this can be dealt with by a treaty process that the Victorian Premier has said nothing is off the table. So all of this could go from a report to law faster than people can come up with reasons why Lydia Thorpe should stay in the Parliament. Advocates for changes to native title laws, requiring state to disapprove traditional owners' connection to country rather than the current requirement, which is for traditional owners to prove their connection. Collaborate with the Commonwealth to negotiate the return of cultural, secret and sacred objects from interstate, overseas and private collections. So the museums of the world that have Aboriginal artefacts, bring them back, and bring them back specifically to Victoria. Recognise waterways as living entities and appoint traditional owners as guardians, granting them oversight of management and commercial uses, including coal and desalination. I'm going through the detail here because this matters. This is going to be a fork in the road about how we deal with our past. Is this too much? We will all find out together. The report also says that they should be exempt traditional owners from paying anything like taxes, rates and charges related to water. Grant traditional owners rights over waterways, negotiate a revenue sharing agreement, obtain consent from Indigenous Victorian groups for mineral resource, extractive projects, climate change responses and renewable energy projects. The Department of Education should develop a separate policy for excluding First Nations students from attendance, classroom exclusions, suspensions, and have modified timetables. Two more. With guidance from First Nations, Victorian University should recognise and compensate First Nations staff for additional colonial load that they bear, and fund separate Indigenous housing networks and increase housing supply, including quotas in the Big Build project. I spend time talking about this tonight not to divide. I spend time talking about this tonight not to whip up fear and hostility, but for you to understand what is in a report that you will probably be too busy or unable to read. Because we have not just the statement of claims, we have the reasons for them, and we have a Victorian government in particular that has said everything's on the table and they are happy to negotiate on all of these things. It'll then be tested by the Victorian Parliament, the majority of which, of course, are Labor MPs in the lower house, and there is a left-wing group that will most likely support things in the upper house. So this is not off into the never never. We are in the middle of the story right now. Now, Qantas had a big day today. They've got 6 million customers' information that is locked up in most of their computers. That network has been compromised. We will find out in the next few days whether or not it is 100,000, 200,000 or most likely millions of people's data that has been hacked. If you are a frequent flyer, like many Australians are, well, yes, your information could be exactly what we are talking about here. It's already making news into the United States, and some customers have had their reaction already.
Well, I'm pretty unhappy. I mean, I've been caught up in these data breaches before, and I'm a frequent flyer member, so I'm assuming I've been caught in this.
It seems to be a common occurrence these days. So unless I'm directly impacted, then I'm not too fazed about it. And I'm sure Qantas would let me know if it's going to impact me directly.
It's definitely scary to hear. It's not what we want, and as someone of the public, it's scary that they can get our information and